Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around. And Abby, thank you so much for not butchering both my first name and second name. I have a request to start this talk. So my wife of 32 years, while I was preparing my speech, she said, make sure to be funny. So I have now a special request for all of you. When I make any jokes, please laugh as hard as you can so that I can go home with her. In a few minutes, a slide is going to show up with multiple titles, and actually you heard those titles. So I have a question for you. Which of these titles do you think is the dearest to my heart? So you've heard a distinguished professor, an endowed professor, a director, an associate VP. So which one of these, and they are actually listed on my slide in the following order. They came as an endowed chair, as a Horn Distinguished Professor, Associate Vice President for Research, and then Director of Centers. Which one do you think is the dearest to my heart? None of these are actually the dearest to my heart. There is one missing, which is a biotechnology researcher. This is the one that's the dearest to my heart. All these titles are actually outcome of being a researcher. They resulted from the fact that I have excelled into doing that. 32 years ago, or actually 37 years ago, my wife, at that time I was dating her, still the same wife if you're asking, she came to me and said, why do we need to move to the United States? I was like, because I want to pursue a dream. And she said, why can't you pursue the dream here? We are from Lebanon, and you've heard Lebanon already today. And my answer to her was, there are no resources that are available in Lebanon that will allow me to pursue what I want to pursue. And for that reason, we have to move. So she's the only child. And by the way, never marry an only child. We can talk about that offline. She is the only child. And her mom's dream was actually, she had a big house, and her dream was actually to get married and live with her. And what I did is I took her only child, and we traveled thousands of miles across the pond to the US, where I pursued my dream of doing research. Before we talk about biotechnology, there was always the domestication of animals. That's a biotechnology. In 6,000 years ago, they used to plant in a certain way. That's biotechnology. Now, the term biotechnology was not coined until 1919. This is when it was coined as a biotechnology, and it's a two-word. And you can actually search for so many different things about what does it represent. But at the end of the day, biotechnology is a mix of two words, biology and technology. And then the question becomes, you can use the technology for whatever you want that's based on a biological process from which you can actually create drugs, you can create vaccines, you can create the most famous drug among ladies nowadays. You know which drug is that? That's the most famous among ladies nowadays? Ozempic. You can actually use biotechnology where you are studying a biological system in order to make crops better, in order to make industry better. You can use it to have agricultural resilient crops. You have crops that are resistant to droughts and so on, which will answer the question of what do we need in terms to actually continue to sustain the food security that we need. We can actually need the bioinformatics that will allow us to look at the so complex data that's generated. You can work on developing a new ways of looking at diseases. We are working with a group of researchers in order to look at how we can detect traumatic brain injury at different stages of the process. We are involved in understanding Alzheimer's beyond the amyloid, beta amyloid, which usually accumulate in the brain. And when you see amyloid beta in the brain, it's too late. So we're trying to figure out how can we actually pick up on Alzheimer's before that. We are involved in understanding how the breast cancer cells cross the blood-brain barrier and result in brain cancer for those patients that actually have breast cancer. We do all of this, but then in the back of our mind, there is always the question, are we in compliance? And that is where we have the line that we have to make sure that we don't cross. In compliance, meaning that the research you are conducting is going to be beneficial and it's not going to be harmful to the society. If you cross that line, this is when biotechnology becomes a dark biotechnology that you want to avoid. We all remember COVID. We still don't know whether it is a dark or not, but at the end of the day, the ability to have a virus out of the blue was actually something that's unknown, and we still might be questioning that. But in as much as biotechnology might be responsible for that, biotechnology was responsible for the vaccine that was developed in the shortest possible time in order to overcome what potentially could have been a dark biotechnology. All in all, biotechnology is a word that we use. But biotechnology, at the end of the day, would only be successful if a group of scientists that are working in different fields, in fields that do not cross, would actually talk to each other and be able to come together in order to come up with something that is good for the future of mankind. It is almost like, many of you know, the blind man and the elephant, which is in many cultures that have different forms. But in sciences and in biotechnology, we have that too. We have a microbiologist that might be looking at the trunk of the elephant. We have a chemist that might be looking at the ears of the elephant, and so on and so forth. In order for science to move forward and biotechnology to move forward, we need all of these scientists to come together, work together in order to advance a good cause, a cause that would have an impact where you would see it in healthcare, where you would see it in environment, and where you would see it in a daily life. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do with biotechnology is push the envelope in such a way where we would not have struggles. We would not have uncertainty. We do not have identity problem. We use AI in a good way to push sciences further, to push biotechnology further. At the end, if you look at the curve of life expectancy over the decades, you're always going to see this sharp increase, which could be partially attributed to biotechnology at large. We do a lot with biotechnology. We work a lot with biotechnology. At the end of the day, biotechnology is not just another science that I'm standing up here talking about. It is a pathway to a better, healthier world for everyone. And in order for that to be fulfilled, we have all to work together as a group of scientists with one aim and one goal. And that's what would push the scientific envelope and would advance the future that we are all looking for, and leaving this world in a much better than the way it was. Even for plastic, biotechnology would have an answer and we'll have a solution for it. This is sort of like my talk in a nutshell. But now, as a professor, I have to end with a quiz. We cannot leave the stage without a quiz. And the quiz is the following. This is the 9th talk of this evening. You all agree with that? Did you all do the math, quick math? This is the 9th one, right? How many of the previous 8 talks are included in biotechnology? How many of the 8 talks that preceded this talk are actually, without cheating, don't cheat, don't look at the titles, don't look at the title. How many of the topics that were discussed during the previous 8 talks are actually included in biotechnology talk? All of them? I would actually give you almost half a star there. It's not all of them, because I could not incorporate music into biotechnology. That's the only item was left out. Identity, which was the first part of my talk about what am I? Uncertainty. If you paid attention, the title of my talk is different than the title that's actually in the brochure. And that's what we scientists always do. I never give my talk to people before I actually give the talk. Earlier today, the organizer actually tried to say, would you like to practice your talk? And my answer was, absolutely not. And they said, are you sure? I said, I've never done that, and I will never do that, because they lose the spontaneous component associated with my talk. Struggle? We struggle a lot. We do a lot of AI associated with the talk. At the end, all these items that have been discussed in the previous 8 talks were actually included in my talk. Thank you so much.